Now, we need to turn our attention to one last area within the learning and classical conditioning and that area, just to round out our exploration of this area. And what I want to pay attention to is the effects of biology and cognition. And for the longest time, behaviorists, including Skinner, actually made some fairly grandiose claims that learning principles would generalize from one response to another and from one species to another. So they thought that it was generally applicable across species. What's been found actually in the current research, and this particular gentleman here is a guy by the name of John Garcia, and he really challenged the notion that conditioning and learning principles are constrained. They're limited by certain things biologically. And so that's what we want to look at a little bit initially here. So the key concept is what we refer to as biological constraints on conditioning itself. And essentially what that means is that an animal's natural predisposition tends to constrain the capacity for operant conditioning. So it creates a ceiling in a sense. And so their biology limits the capacity for conditioning. And that's the relatively new discovery here, is that it's not universally applied and universally understood. Species are biologically prepared, is the term that we use, is biologically prepared to learn certain things that enhance its survival. So biologically prepared, and this enhances survival. And that's true with Garcia's work, because he began to recognize a particular pattern in rats who were irradiated. In other words, they were exposed to radiation, and they would avoid certain aspects but not others. So it wasn't things that they could see, it was things they could taste, which is a biological predisposition of the animal itself. And so organisms are predisposed to learn associations that help them adapt. That's the basic bottom line. And so biological constraints predispose organisms to learn associations that are naturally adaptive. And so training that overrides this biological predisposition will probably not hang on. So any training that overrides the biological predisposition is not going to persist, and at times will destructively break through. So anything that overrides the biological predisposition will not persist. Now, let me give you a great example of that. Some of you may be familiar with Shamu, the killer whale. Well, we were all shocked when we read the news articles about this whale that had drowned its human trainer. And that's a good example where training attempts to override these tendencies, and on occasion the natural instincts of the animal will break through. And that's the biological constraints we're talking about here on conditioning itself. So in this, in the killer shark's case, the tendency was to drive its prey down into the water. Now, of course, it wasn't distinguishing a human from any other prey, and so it was basically doing what it was biologically, in a sense, wired to do. And that's a good example of where biology really constrains the level of things that we can actually train animals. So wild animals that are trained are are still, and you probably can guess what, are still wild animals. They may be trained, but there is a limit to the training that they may actually engage in or actually display. So under the best of conditions, we'll see the behavior we've trained. Under other conditions, we may not.